Do you remember the exact moment childhood left you? Not the day, not the year, the moment when something inside you closed. There's a specific kind of silence that lives in the space between who you were and who you had to become. It sounds like a door closing in an empty house, like the last day of summer when you realize autumn has already begun, like your mother's voice calling you for dinner, but you're already standing in the kitchen, making it yourself. Growing up too fast doesn't announce itself. It arrives in fragments, small moments that feel like nothing at the time. Your hand reaching for the light switch your father used to control. The realization that you've stopped asking for help because help stopped coming. The weight of a secret you carry because someone else couldn't hold it. The world doesn't prepare you for this. One day you're building forts from blankets, and the next you're building walls from silence, protecting everyone around you from the weight you've learned to carry alone. There's a photograph somewhere, you smiling, but if you look closely at your eyes, you can see it. The moment awareness replaced innocence. The moment you learned that safety is a story adults tell, not a place you get to live. They call it resilience. When a child learns to parent themselves. When survival becomes a skill you master before you learn to drive. When you become the adult in the room before you understand what rooms are supposed to feel like. But here's what they don't tell you about resilience. It's not a gift. It's a scar that learned to smile. You develop this radar, this hyper-awareness. You can read a room before you enter it. Sense tension in the space between words. Predict outcomes before conversations finish. Your nervous system becomes a prediction machine, always calculating, always 3 steps ahead. You learn to make yourself small when chaos is big. To make yourself big when others are small. You become a shapeshifter, molding yourself to whatever the moment demands, forgetting that children are supposed to be allowed to just be. And somewhere in all that adapting, you lose the ability to ask a simple question. What do I need? Because your needs learn to hide. To become quiet, to wait for a moment that never quite arrives. You became so good at meeting everyone else's needs that your own became foreign, unfamiliar, almost embarrassing to acknowledge. There's this thing that happens when you grow up too fast. You become incredibly capable and desperately lost. You can solve problems that would break most people, navigate crises with unsettling calm. Hold space for others' pain without flinching. But ask you what you want for dinner, what makes you happy, what you dream about, and you freeze. Because growing up too fast means learning to survive before learning to live. It means mastering responsibility before understanding joy. It means becoming an expert at holding things together while having no idea how to let yourself fall apart. You watch other people your age and there's this strange distance. They seem younger somehow, lighter. They complain about things that feel trivial to you because you've already survived what they're only just beginning to worry about. And you feel guilty for that thought, because you know they're not actually younger. You're just older than your years, carrying decades in a body that's barely begun. This is the paradox of accelerated growth. You gain competence. You lose wonder. You gain awareness. You lose permission. You gain the ability to handle anything. You lose the belief that you shouldn't have to. Let me tell you what nobody says about this. The exhaustion isn't physical. It's the exhaustion of wearing a mask so long you forget there's a face underneath. Of being so strong for so long that softness feels like weakness. Of holding yourself together with such precision that you're terrified of what would happen if you finally let go. You've learned to comfort yourself. Late at night, when anxiety wraps around your chest, you know exactly what to do. Breathing techniques, grounding exercises, self-talk that sounds suspiciously like a parent you never had. You've become your own caretaker because caretaking was a position that went unfilled. And it works, until it doesn't. Until you realize that comforting yourself isn't the same as being comforted. That self-sufficiency isn't the same as connection. That independence, when it's born from necessity rather than choice, feels less like freedom and more like exile. There are moments when you catch yourself laughing at something genuinely funny, And for a second, you feel young. Actually young. And it's beautiful and terrifying because you realize how rare that feeling has become. How much of your life you've spent in a state of vigilant adulthood, forgetting that playfulness isn't something you outgrow. It's something that gets taken. You watch children sometimes. Really watch them. The way they ask for what they need without shame. The way they cry when they're hurt instead of pushing through. The way they truly believe, that the adults around them will catch them if they fall. And something in you aches. Not with jealousy exactly. More like grief. For the child you were who learned too early that falling meant hitting the ground. That crying meant being too much. That needing meant being a burden. Here's what the psychology textbooks get wrong about childhood trauma and accelerated maturity. They focus on what happened. But the real story is what didn't happen. The comfort that never came. The protection that was absent. The space to be messy, uncertain, afraid, space that was never offered. The luxury of making mistakes without catastrophic consequences. The experience of being held, not physically necessarily, but emotionally, psychologically, held in someone else's capable hands so you could rest yours. When you grow up too fast, you don't just skip developmental stages. You skip the foundational belief that the world is fundamentally safe, that you are fundamentally worthy of care, that your existence isn't conditional on your usefulness, and that belief or lack of it becomes the lens through which you see everything. Relationships become transactions. I'll be valuable so you'll stay. Success becomes survival. I'll achieve so I'll be safe. Rest becomes suspicious. If I stop, everything will fall apart. You develop what psychologists call an external locus of control paired with an internal locus of responsibility. Meaning, you believe you can't control what happens to you, but you're somehow responsible for everything anyway. It's an impossible equation, and you've been solving it since before you could spell your own name. But here's something true, something that might feel uncomfortable at first. You are not who you had to become. Read that again. You are not who you had to become. That hypervigilant, over-responsible, self-sacrificing version of yourself. That was a role you played for survival. A costume you wore because naked vulnerability would have destroyed you. A shield you forged because the world offered no protection. But survival mode was never meant to be permanent. It was supposed to be temporary. A bridge to get you from danger to safety. Except nobody told you when you reached the other side. Nobody gave you permission to put the shield down. So you kept carrying it. Keep carrying it. Even now. Even in moments when there's no battle to fight. The weight of premature adulthood shows up in strange ways. In your inability to accept help without feeling weak. In the way you apologize for having needs. In how you can support everyone around you but feel paralyzed when it's your turn to receive. In the quiet belief that you're only valuable when you're useful. These aren't character flaws. They're survival strategies that outlived their usefulness. You learned to be strong because being vulnerable wasn't safe. You learned to be independent because depending on others led to disappointment. You learned to minimize your needs because your needs were once treated as burdens. But what if you're safe now? What if you're not actually in the situation that taught you to be this way? What if the child inside you, the one who had to grow up too fast, is still waiting for permission to finally rest? There's a version of you that never got to exist. The one who made mistakes without them feeling like life or death situations. Who asked silly questions. Who was allowed to not know. Who trusted that someone else would handle the hard things so they could focus on the simple joy of being young. That version is gone. And grieving them is not weakness. It's honesty. You can be grateful for your strength and still mourn what it cost you. You can appreciate your resilience and still wish you'd never needed it. You can be proud of who you've become and still ache for who you might have been if circumstances had been kinder. This isn't about blame. Not really. The people who should have protected you were often fighting their own battles, carrying their own weight, drowning in their own versions of growing up too fast. hurt people, but more often, hurt people simply can't hold others the way they need to be held. Understanding that doesn't erase the impact, but it might soften the edges. Here's what healing looks like when you've grown up too fast. It looks like learning to ask for help without a crisis forcing you to. Like letting someone see you struggle without immediately fixing it yourself. Like admitting you don't know something without shame flooding your chest. Like allowing yourself to be cared for without calculating how you'll repay it. It looks like reparenting yourself. Not in a cute self-care way, though that's part of it, but in the deep, uncomfortable work of giving yourself the things you never received. Permission to rest. Permission to fail. Permission to need. Permission to be imperfect and still worthy of love. It's teaching yourself, slowly, painstakingly, that your value isn't tied to your productivity. That your worth isn't conditional on your strength. That being human, messy, uncertain, vulnerable is not something to overcome but something to finally allow. The irony of growing up too fast is that it makes actual growing up harder. Because real maturity isn't about being strong all the time. It's about knowing when to be soft. Real wisdom isn't about having all the answers. It's about being comfortable with questions. Real strength isn't about never needing anyone. It's about being brave enough to admit when you do. You've been strong for so long, and strength has served you. It got you here. Through nights you thought you wouldn't survive. Through losses that should have broken you. Through a childhood that asked for more than childhood should ever demand. But maybe now it's time for something else. Not weakness. Never weakness. But surrender. The kind that doesn't mean giving up, but rather giving in. To rest. To support. To the possibility that you don't have to do this alone anymore. There's a particular kind of courage in admitting you've been tired for as long as you can remember. In saying out loud, "I've been holding this for too long." In letting your shoulders drop, your guard lower, your story be heard. People who grew up at the right pace won't understand this. They'll offer advice that sounds right but feels impossible. Just relax. Don't worry so much. Learn to let go. As if you haven't been trying. As if it's that simple. As if decades of survival patterns can be unwound with a few deep breaths and positive affirmations. It's not that simple. But it is possible. Not quickly. Not easily. Not without setbacks and moments when you slide back into old patterns because they're familiar and familiar feels safe even when it hurts. But slowly, with patience, with the kind of gentleness you've given everyone else but yourself, you can find your way back. Not to childhood. That's gone. But to something softer than survival. Something that feels less like fighting and more like living. If you are listening to this and recognizing yourself in these words, if you feel seen in a way that is both comforting and painful, if you're shaking your head, thinking, yes, exactly, someone finally gets it, so let me tell you something. You didn't do anything wrong. You were a child who needed things that were not provided, who learned to support themselves because no one else did. Which grew quickly because staying small was not safe. And you survived. That matters. You survived and you're here listening to this, which means that part of you, maybe a small part, maybe a part you're barely aware of, is looking for a way to not just survive but to heal. That part of you, the one who is tired of being so strong. The one who wonders what it would be like to finally rest. Listen, not necessarily today, not at this moment. But soon, hear the voice that is buried beneath decades of responsibility and resilience. The one who still remembers what it's like to be young, to be accomplished, being allowed to not have all the answers. That voice is still there, quieter perhaps, hidden, but there. Growing up too fast doesn't have to be your whole story. It can be the first chapter, the origin, the thing that shaped you. But not the thing that defines you forever. You get to write what comes next. And maybe what comes next is softer, slower, more forgiving. Maybe it's learning to be young in the ways you never got to be. Maybe it's discovering that strength and vulnerability aren't opposites. They're partners. If these words found you today, if something in this resonated in that deep, aching way that truth often does, stay with that feeling. Don't rush to fix it or solve it or make it make sense. Just stay with it. And if you need more of this space, these words, this understanding will be here, creating spaces for the parts of you that never got to be young, for the exhaustion that's been invisible for too long, for the child inside you who's still waiting for permission to rest. The sun is setting somewhere, and somewhere else it's rising. You don't have to be strong right now. You don't have to have it figured out. You just have to be here. That's enough. You are enough. You always have been,